Hi, I'm Ann. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be going through my TBR for the readathon I'm co-hosting, which is Around the World in 80 Days. So if you missed my previous video, I will be linking it down in the description, but basically I'm co-hosting a readathon taking place from January 11th to March 31st, where we try to read one book from each country that Phineas Fogg traveled to in Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. So, of course, the first book that is going to be on my physical TBR is Around the World in 80 Days. It has been a few years since I read this, so I look forward to reading it. Now, for the books that I picked out for each country, there are a few books that I couldn't find from my physical TBR, but for the most part, I tried to pick these books from books that are already on my physical TBR, so it's not as if I'm reading extra books that I would have to add to the books I'm already reading from my physical TBR. There were 3 countries that I didn't have any books on from books set in on my physical TBR, so from those I picked out some books that looked very fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one book that I predominantly have to read that week for the readathon. But then I picked a second book that if I get that book done, then I can read that second book. So basically I have a main one that I'm hoping to read and then a spare in case I read it quickly. I'm going to briefly go through the countries again. The countries are England, France, Italy, Egypt, Yemen, India, Singapore, China, Japan, the USA, and Ireland. So those are the 11 countries, and I'm going to go through the books in that order. So the 2 books I picked out from England, the first book that I will read is Ivanhoe by Walter Scott. I bought this a couple months ago and I still haven't gotten to reading it, so I am excited to read this. It is very much a medieval adventure as far as I know, set predominantly in England. And if I end up finishing that one, I do have The History of England by W.E. Lunt. This is more of a dense history, so I don't see myself like actively loving this book, so I see myself skimming it just a little bit. So this is a pretty good, decent second book. The next country is France, and for that one I picked, of course, one of the most challenging books out there, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I love The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, but I feel bad that that is the only book I have ever read by Dumas. So I bought this. I actually got this very old vintage copy for Christmas, and so I want to tackle this during this readathon, which this book is 1,000 pages, so I do have a second book that I picked out, but I'm 99% sure that this would take me the full week to read, if not more, and that's like if I spend all my time devoted to reading this book. But in case I do happen to finish it, I picked out Descartes, his philosophy essays. He was a French philosopher, I think in the 1700s. I don't know much about him, but I got this book from a garage sale, so I do want to read this, but I have a feeling I probably won't read it for the readathon just because The Count of Monte Cristo is a long book. The next country we travel to is Italy, and for that one I only had one book that's like straight up for Italy, and that is The Betrothed by Alessandro Manzoni. This is, I believe, a Gothic classic type mystery. I'm not actually sure what it's about. It is considered one of the greatest Italian classics. So this one again is a big book, so this may take up my entire week of reading Italian books. But in case I do finish that, I do have another book by Umberto Eco, Boldolino, which I believe, even though the main character, Boldolino himself, comes from Italy, most of the book predominantly takes place during one of the Crusades, I'm not sure which one, and Boldolino is in Constantinople. So I don't know how much this fits for actually being set in Italy, but as it is, I probably won't end up having time to read this one because The Betrothed is just so long. And then the next country is Egypt. And for that, for Christmas, I got Egypt's Golden Couple, which talks about Akhenaten and Nefertiti. So that one, of course, is about Egyptian history. So that is very fitting for reading about Egypt. But then I also have a book about Tutankhamun, the Untold Story, which I have had on my TBR for a long time. So I'm going to prioritize the Egypt's Golden Couple just because I just received it and I need to finish all new books I buy within a month of getting them. So I need to prioritize that one, but I'm hoping to get to both of them in that week. Now we get to Yemen, and Yemen is the only country that all of us who are hosting this readathon really struggled with picking out a book for this. And I know Holly had a couple good recommendations, and if she's come out by the time I come out with my video, whenever she comes out with her video of her TBR for this readathon, I will link that video down in the description, even if it comes out a few days after I put out mine, just because she had some good ideas of books that came from Yemen. But I found one that looked really interesting, and I only have one because none of the other ones looked intriguing enough for me. But this one was The Fox Hunt by Mohammed al-Samawi, and it is set in Yemen, and it follows this doctor who is a Muslim and begins to try to make his community open to different religions. So accepting all religions, not necessarily, agreeing with them, but saying, we should accept them, we should not kill them, things like that. And he ends up receiving death threats, and then he ends up immigrating to America. And so it is his story. It's, I assume, going to be difficult to read and very brutal, but it sounds like a fascinating book. And I know nothing. I've never heard of him. I've never heard of the book. I was just browsing to find a book set in Yemen, and it looks great. So I look forward to reading it. So the next country is India, and for that I have a very big book. Again, I probably won't get to the second book. I have the Bhagavad Gita as it is. This is a religious Hindi text. I don't know. I think I've read an excerpt of it, but I don't know much about it, and I look forward to reading it. But again, it is like 700 pages, so it's a big book. And I have a feeling I won't understand half of it because it's a religious text of a religion that I don't know much about, but I will try my best to try to understand it and appreciate it from the perspective, because I know it's such an important text for the Hindu religion. But if I do finish that, I do have Autobiography of a Yogi, considered to be one of the greatest masters in India. I think he lived in the early 1900s, I think, because he wrote this book when he was older. Now we go to Singapore, and this was another country that I couldn't find any books on my bookshelf that were set in the country, but I did pick out two very easy light reads to get from the library. The first one I've actually had on my TBR before, and I wanted to read it years ago, and that is The Singapore Sapphire by A.M. Stewart. This is a cozy historical mystery series set in Singapore in 1910, and follows this young woman who travels to Singapore at the height of the colonial rule and very much understands the society, but she's also drawn into like the darkness of her past. So there's a murder mystery, of course. It's going to be great, and I've had this on my TBR for a couple years now, so this seems like a good enough time to read it. And then if I get done with that quickly, which I probably will, I do have a second cozy mystery, oddly enough, Auntie Lee's Delights by Uvidya Yu, and it's the first one of like a cozy mystery series. It will also be interesting to read both books back to back to see the differences between like 1910 Shanghai versus like modern Shanghai. So, and cozy mysteries are one of the easiest and quickest genres for me to read, so I'm hoping that by adding that to my TBR, it will be very easy to like breeze through those books. The next country is China, and for that, I am hoping to finally get to Pavilion of Women by Paras Buck. I've owned this book for a long time, and I finally got to Imperial Woman by Paras Buck, but I need to get to this one. So that one, obviously set in China. I believe it's follows, obviously, the harem of Emperor or something. I don't know much about this book. And then if I finish that one, which I probably will be, it's light, I do have like Tang Dynasty stories, which are just a light collection of stories, very light anthology type thing, by different authors, and they're all Chinese authors, so I look forward to reading it. Then the next country is Japan, and for that, technically I only own one book, but the second book kind of counts. The first book is The Rising Sun, the Decline and Fall of the Japanese Empire, 1938 to 1945 by John Tolland. This is a nonfiction history pretty dense, but it has a lot of pictures in it, so I'm hoping it's not too dense of a read. And I know quite a bit about the Japanese Empire. I took a class in college about exactly this time period in history. Well, actually, from the end of like the Tokugawa Empire dynasty reign, all the way up to like following World War II. So I look forward to reading this book. It should be interesting, fascinating. But if I finish that, I do also have The Origins of Oriental Civilization. And by Oriental, they seem to include Japan, Korea, China, I think Mongolia, and Manchuria, and Eastern Siberia. So it's all of the Northern Asian countries. So I look forward to reading this one as well. And this one's a small book. But again, it's not exactly just for Japanese, but Japan is included in the history. That's why I'm including it on my TBR. Now we are going to go to the USA. And of course, that will be easy because I have a lot of books on my bookshelf that are set in the USA, especially classics. But I picked out some like older classics. The first one is The Deer Slayer by James Fenimore Cooper. This is the first book. The most famous book in this series is The Last of the Mohicans, which they made into a movie. It's an interesting movie, but nothing like the book. And I read an abridged version of The Last of the Mohicans when I was a child, like a kid's version, but I've never read the full version of that one, and I know nothing about this one except it follows, I believe, the same character from The Last of the Mohicans, so I look forward to reading it. I have it in this like beautiful old copy that it's not in the best condition, but it has like pretty pictures. So yeah, that's going to be my USA read. But I also have a more modern one, is The Sound of the Fury by William Faulkner, which since buying this book, I've heard a lot of people have mixed feelings about this book, so I'm nervous about not liking it. And the last country is, of course, Ireland, and I was surprised because obviously Yemen and Singapore are not exactly countries that get written about a lot. But with Ireland, I was expecting to already own a book that's set in Ireland. But no, not at all. I picked out, again, two like cozy reads. The first one is Cozy Mystery again, and that's Murder in an Irish Village by Carleen O'Connor. It's just a cozy modern mystery that's set in Ireland. So the other one is The Deveril Chronicles. I actually put the second book, The Daughters of Ireland by Santa Motifer, on my list, but then I realized it was the second book of the series, and the first book is actually The Girl in the Castle. So I will probably try to read The Girl in the Castle and not the second book, even though the second book is technically the one that I put on my TBR, but that's fine. So did this video give you any ideas of what to read? Do you know what you're reading? I would love my comment section to be just full of recommendations for other people. So especially for like the harder countries, for Yemen and Singapore, what are some of like books you know, or some of your favorite books that are set in those countries? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, like, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a great day. Bye.